My family loves him. They'll never accept you. I can't choose you over them," she said, choosing their approval over me. So I moved on in silence. Now she's miserable, begging for another chance, and they call me daily to complain about the monster they forced on her. But I don't care anymore. I never thought I'd be writing something like this online, but it's been gnawing at me for years. And if anyone's out there reading, maybe you'll understand, or maybe you'll just shake your head at the absurdity of it all. My name's Ryan, and 2 years ago my life got turned upside down by someone I thought I'd spend forever with. Her name was Jessica, but for the sake of this story, let's keep names safe. We met in college, around 6 years ago, in that typical intro to literature class that somehow everyone took, and honestly, I don't even remember what we were reading. I just remember her sitting there, sketchbook in hand, doodling quietly while she listened to the lecture, eyes half closed, concentrating, and somehow she looked both impossible and familiar all at once. I was a scholarship kid, working class parents. Dad's a mechanic. Mom teaches high school chemistry, not a ton of money, but a steady home, and I guess maybe that stability mattered in some way, because I was grounded, ambitious, and I worked hard for everything I had. Jessica, on the other hand, she came from old money, the kind where the house itself had stories, and the holidays were invitations to places I'd never even heard of, but none of that mattered at first. She was smart, irreverent, had this laugh that made you forget everything else for a second, and she treated me like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, not like some outsider trying to sneak into her world. We hit it off instantly, studying together, grabbing cheap coffee, wandering the city talking about books, movies, everything, and it was amazing. I fell hard, not just for her, but for the way she made me feel like I belonged somewhere I never thought I could. But her family never let that belongingness breathe. From the first holiday at her parents' sprawling estate, it was clear I wasn't welcome. Her mom, Mrs. Kincaid, who always smiled too tightly, would make these offhand comments like, "Oh, Ryan, how quaint that you know how to fix your own car. Our mechanic does that for us." And her dad, he had this way of looking at me over the table, like he was weighing whether I was ambitious enough, smart enough, rich enough to even deserve breathing the same air as his daughter. And David, of course David, their golden boy from the same private school, same vacations, same circle, always around like a shadow waiting for the right moment. I tried to ignore it. Jessica assured me it was nothing. She chose me, she said, and I believed her. We moved into a small apartment after graduation, working overtime, saving, scraping, living simply because we wanted it to be ours, not theirs. I turned down a promotion that would have required travel because she needed me while she did her master's in art history, which, to be fair, her family partially funded. I covered the rest with side gigs, sometimes barely sleeping. I remember one weekend she was buried in finals, stressed, exhausted, so I pulled double shifts to cover a small getaway. We drove out to the mountains, rented a little cabin, cooked together, and for a night, it felt like we were untouchable. She cried that weekend and told me I was her rock, and I believed it. I really did. But the family pressure never stopped. Every gathering, David was there. Every dinner, comparisons were made. Every joke subtly or not so subtly hinted at me being an outsider. "David just started his own business. Isn't that exciting?" she'd say, or "My parents adore him. It makes life so easy." And I stayed loyal, loving, believing that love meant enduring that constant gnawing. For years I proposed. Simple ring, months of saving, my heart on my sleeve, and she said yes. But even that excitement was hollowed out quickly by her family. Every pre-wedding planning session involved David. Every brunch, every comment, every toast, a reminder that in her family's eyes, I was temporary, and she was already reconsidering who she could be with, on the guise of thinking about the future. I remember coming home one night after work, heart pounding, expecting dinner, expecting her to smile when she saw me, and there she was, bags half packed, the apartment heavy with a silence I couldn't cut through. "Ryan, we need to talk," she said, folding her arms like she had rehearsed this for weeks. Her words hit like a hammer. "My family, they'll never accept you. I can't keep fighting them. It's exhausting." I stood there, stunned, watching the relief in her eyes. Not pain, not regret, just relief. She chose comfort over love, ease over the messy, beautiful reality we'd built together. She laughed a little, dismissively, like it was all a simple inconvenience. David, she admitted casually, was one of us, understood the pressures, the expectations, the world she'd been born into, and I would always be an outsider. And she was right. I would always be an outsider in her family, but not in my own life, not anymore. I nodded. I said nothing, because at that point words were meaningless. She collected her things, thanked me for being kind, left, and the door slammed. Silence swallowed the apartment, my heart. The small ring box I had saved for months, still sitting on the table. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't beg. I just sat, letting it sink in, the betrayal, the manipulation, the weight of years spent trying to fit into a world that never wanted me. In the days that followed, I packed, arranged the lease to be broken, found a smaller place, nothing fancy, but mine, quiet, mine. Work became my anchor, distractions my refuge. Slowly, the betrayal turned into clarity. I started to rebuild. Gym, hiking groups, new friends who didn't care about pedigrees or estates or bloodlines, traveling for work, new responsibilities that were mine alone. A year later, I bought a house, small, modest, but paid for with my sweat. I started dating casually. Nothing serious, nothing that reminded me of her or that world. And then the news started trickling in, through mutual friends, through social channels. I learned that Jessica and David's fairy tale wasn't what anyone had imagined. David was lazy and entitled, dependent, never truly motivated, and she was exhausted, trapped mediating for him, covering his mistakes, running his life, so the family could keep the illusion alive. She looked miserable. That was almost poetic in a way. And then, of course, she tried to crawl back. It started subtly. Texts from unknown numbers, calls, mutual friends reaching out. "She's really sorry, Ryan." Jake would say. "She says she made a mistake." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The power had shifted. I was free. I was thriving. She showed up at my office one afternoon, disheveled, red-eyed, begging for 5 minutes, spinning a story how wrong it all was, how David wasn't the person she needed, how I had been the one steady, reliable, perfect partner she threw away. I listened, nodding, calm. "You chose comfort," I said. "You chose easy. That's not my problem anymore." Her texts got nastier over time. "Heartless, jerk, boring life, you'll regret it." But I didn't bite. I didn't answer. Mrs. Kincaid herself called, begging, pleading, but it was laughable. The family that pushed her into the situation suddenly wanted my forgiveness, suddenly wanted me to validate them. I blocked numbers. I refused. A few weeks later, at my housewarming party, I stepped outside to take a call from Mrs. Kincaid, the last one I ever took. She begged, pleaded, told me Jessica was miserable, that I was the one who understood her, that she had made a mistake. I laughed quietly to myself, leaning against the railing, the sound of my friend's laughter inside echoing in contrast to her desperation on the line. "Sorry," I said, calm, firm. "It has nothing to do with me. Goodbye." And I hung up, blocked her, blocked them. Silence became my ally. I went back inside, toasted with my friends, and didn't think of her again. I moved on. I thrived. A promotion, a home, hobbies I loved, friendships I chose. I didn't hate her. I didn't need revenge. But the clarity, the freedom, the realization that I was enough on my own, that was everything. Years of manipulation, betrayal, and family interference had led me here, to a place I never thought I could be. Content, independent, unshakable. I learned a hard lesson. Never let anyone make you feel like an outsider in your own life. And I tell this story not for pity, not for attention, but so that anyone out there caught in the crossfire of family, love, and obligation understand that your worth is not defined by the approval of others. I built something real, on my terms, and I will never let anyone, no matter how much I love them, dictate my happiness again. Months passed, and life kept moving, the kind of quiet, steady motion that felt almost boring on the surface, but was secretly liberating. I kept thinking about Jessica sometimes, not in the obsessive, longing way, but as a reference point, like a scar that reminded you where you'd been. Flashbacks would hit me at the weirdest moments, driving to work past the tree-lined streets of our old apartment, seeing couples walk hand in hand past the little cafe we used to haunt, or even when someone at work mentioned a vacation spot she had always wanted to go to. Those memories used to sting, but now they were just past. I reminded myself constantly that I had done everything right, that I hadn't cheated, hadn't played games, hadn't begged. I had loved her honestly, and that was enough. What she did with that love was her choice. I didn't dwell on it. I let it fuel me instead. I got involved in hiking groups, joined a weekend photography class, even took up cooking again because, ironically, I missed the time she had criticized my attempt at making soufflés. It was therapeutic, almost like reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. My friends noticed a change, and for the first time in a long while, I was genuinely happy without having to measure my worth against someone else's expectations. I didn't just survive, I thrived. The new apartment, tiny as it was, became a sanctuary. I painted the walls, rearranged furniture the way I liked, hung photos I had taken on our trips, none of which involved Jessica. Slowly, the ring she had left behind in that box on the table became less a symbol of betrayal and more of a lesson, reminders of what I'd endured, what I'd survived, what I had built on my own. And then came the first unavoidable encounter with the mess she had created. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished setting up for a small dinner with a few colleagues from work. My phone buzzed with a message from Jake, one of our old college friends. He always had a way of dropping information casually, like it was nothing, but this time it felt like a bomb. Dude, you won't believe it. Jessica and David? Total disaster. She's miserable. He's a complete dud. I stared at the message and smiled, not out of cruelty, but because I had known that she had made a choice for ease and had gotten exactly what she asked for. Jake kept texting, sending me photos, snippets of conversations, casual mentions of arguments, David refusing to work, her trying to keep the peace, the lavish lifestyle crumbling under its own weight. I didn't gloat. I didn't even reply much. I just acknowledged, internally, that life had a way of teaching people lessons, some gentler than others. But then it escalated. The first text from her came out of the blue, anonymous number, vaguely familiar. Ryan, hey, it's me. Can we talk? My stomach twisted for a second, an old reflex, but I crushed it immediately. I didn't respond. A week later, another, I miss our hikes. Life's been a lot. Coffee. Ignored. Then the call started. One night, I got a voicemail. Her voice trembling but desperate. Ryan, please, David isn't what I thought. I made a mistake. I need you. Please, just a friend, can we talk? A friend? After 2 years? After the way she had left, the way she had abandoned me? I deleted it. No sympathy. No hesitation. The power had shifted. I wasn't just free. I was untouchable to her manipulations. I started noticing patterns. Mutual friends contacted me on her behalf, their guilt forcing them to act as messengers. Ryan, she's falling apart. David's terrible. She made a mistake. Can you forgive her? Forgive? For what? For choosing comfort over love? For letting herself be pushed by her family? I blocked numbers. I didn't answer. Their attempt became more aggressive, culminating in her showing up at my office unannounced. I was walking out for lunch, and there she was, slightly disheveled, red-eyed, begging for 5 minutes of my time. I stopped, keeping my distance, heart hammering strangely despite the calm I had cultivated. Ryan, please just listen. David, he's useless. He expects me to do everything. Mom's hating him. He's ruined everything. And there it was. Her desperation, thinly veiled with entitlement. The same smugness she had always carried but warped now by fear. I stayed calm. Even. You chose easy, I said quietly. You chose comfort over love. That's not my problem anymore. She flushed, anger flickering, confusion evident in her eyes. But I didn't give her more. No lectures, no pleading. Just the truth. She had made her choices. The texts after that got nastier, but I stayed silent, letting her rage, her guilt, and the manipulations from her family crash against the armor I had built. Mrs. Kincaid called, pleading, demanding, trying to involve me in a family-created mess. I blocked her entirely. The last thread connecting me to the old life snapped. My housewarming party, a few weeks later, was the literal affirmation of that. I invited my colleagues, my new friends, and as I stepped outside to take a call, it was her, of course, Mrs. Kincaid on the other line, pleading, trying to convince me, begging for my time, telling me how miserable she was, how perfect I had been, how wrong it all turned out. And I laughed quietly, leaning against the railing, hearing laughter and chatter from inside, the life I had built thriving, peaceful, entirely mine. Sorry, I said calm, firm. It has nothing to do with me. Goodbye. And I hung up. Blocked. Done. That was it. No apology, no lingering care, nothing. And the clarity settled in. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring myself against someone else's approval. I wasn't trying to fit into a family that never wanted me. I wasn't losing myself to someone else's choices or fears. I was whole. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. I took a new promotion, bought a small house in the suburbs, joined a community volunteer group, started dating casually, slowly but intentionally opening my heart to people who treated me as I deserved. Jessica and David faded into irrelevance, occasional mentions in passing, but nothing that mattered. Their chaos was no longer my burden. Occasionally, a memory would hit me, like walking past a tree-lined street or smelling pine in the winter, and I'd remember a hike we'd taken together, how she had smiled at some small, meaningless joke, and for a moment, my chest would tighten. But it wasn't longing. It was recognition of the past, acknowledgement of growth, and the satisfaction, the quiet, constant satisfaction, came from the realization that I had survived intact, that I had loved without compromise, and even though she hadn't, I had not lost myself. I started taking long weekend trips to the mountains, the beach, even Europe for work conferences, solo adventures where I could just be, reflect, breathe. I hiked, I photographed, I cooked, I read, I laughed, I cried, but all for me. And that's when it struck me fully. The betrayal, the abandonment, the manipulations, they had been lessons, brutal ones, but lessons nonetheless. I learned to recognize toxicity, to see manipulation for what it was, to not cave to pressure, to understand that love was not just about enduring. It was about mutual respect, equality, and standing shoulder to shoulder, not bending beneath someone else's family expectations. Occasionally, I heard things secondhand. Friends telling me David had doubled down on laziness, Jessica exhausted, miserable, stuck, her family regretting everything, but I didn't care. I didn't gloat, didn't comment, didn't involve myself. They had created their own mess. Life had continued without my involvement, and that, more than anything, was a victory. I started dating casually, careful, deliberate, testing waters with people who were compatible, not convenient. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt normal, unpressured, free to make mistakes, free to learn, free to be loved without calculation or hierarchy. And then one night, I received an unexpected text. Unknown number. I didn't recognize it immediately. Ryan, please, can we talk? Instinctively, I set the phone down, didn't respond. I had survived 2 years without her, and I wasn't about to let one last thread pull me back into old habits. Peace had taken root, slowly, persistently, impervious to her attempts. And it felt good, really good, freedom, calm, self-respect. It was intoxicating in a way I hadn't realized I craved. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch of my small house, listening to the distant laughter of neighbors, the wind through the trees, and I realized I hadn't felt this kind of happiness, unconditioned, in years. Not the brief, temporary happiness of a weekend getaway or a stolen moment, but deep, honest, rooted happiness. And I knew in that moment that I would never let anyone else, no matter how much I loved them, dictate my life again. I was an outsider. I was the author of my own story, and I had finally learned to write on my own terms.